It's always important when you read the scriptures to see what they don't say as well as what they do say. The heading to the Bible, and Genesis 1 is very significant. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then immediately after that, the focus is not the heavens, but the earth. The earth was without form and void. It was darkness covering the face of the deep. Now, what is meant by heavens and earth, and what's going on here? Now, heavens and earth can be used in a number of different senses, and I won't map them all out. But the way it's used here is heavens represents the invisible world, the spiritual world, God's world. And the earth is not just planet Earth, but it's quite obvious with the mention of the sun and moon and the stars, is the visible universe. So, in the beginning, God created the invisible universe and the visible universe. But what's then, in what follows, what do we get no further mention of? The heavens. God's world. And that's deliberately so. There's a deliberate silence there. This is not your business, it's not my business, it's not human business, it's God's business. Because in that space you get things like God's creation of angels, the whole of the heavenly realm, but also Satan, demons. That's curtains drawn across. There's no word here. The focus is on the creation and ordering of the visible world. There's a very important principle which is involved here. Can you turn to Deuteronomy 29, verse 29, a passage that Luther comes to again and again, and rightly so. Deuteronomy 29, verse 29. Vaughan, could you read, please?
The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our sons forever, that we may observe all the words of this law.
Righto, the secret things in Hebrew are the hidden things. The hidden things belong to God, not to us, but what's been given to us are the revealed things in God's law. So Luther, you probably know from dogmatics, Luther distinguishes Deus absconditus, the hidden God, from the revealed God, Deus revelatus. Very important distinction, and fundamentally so. Christians need to be agnostic about the things that are hidden that we don't know about and we've not been given to know. Now, what kind of world did God create? Number one, God created an ordered world. He created what Germans call Schöpfungsordnung, created order. Cosmic order would be, I think, the best thing in modern English, and that connects you with New Age kind of thinking. Cosmic order. And the emphasis here is that God orders what are chaotic powers for beneficial purposes. Now, chaotic is not necessarily evil, it's just neutral. Think in terms, for example, of atomic energy. Is that good or bad? It depends on what you do with it and use it. It's both a great good because it energizes the whole of our visible world, and yet that same power could destroy itself and everything. All these things here in themselves have both of those aspects to them. They are neither ultimately good or evil, but God it doesn't eliminate chaos, disorder, but he orders it for beneficial purposes. Can you turn, Tom, to Psalm 74, 12 to 17. Psalm 74, 12 to 17, which is a lament, and in this lament you get a strange little hymnic fragment. Could you read 12 to 17?
Which Tom's?
Tom H.
That's all right.
Yet God, my King, is from of old, working salvation in the earth. You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of the dragons in the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. You cut openings for springs and torrents. You dried up ever-flowing streams. Yours is the day, yours also the night. You established the luminaries and the sun. You have fixed all the bounds of the earth. You made summer and winter.
Here, this psalm uses imagery taken from Canaanite mythology, and it's chaos kampf, battle against chaos. You remember that Canaanite religion has to do with the battle between Baal, the sky god, and Moth, the underworld god. Neither ever wins the victory. 6 months of the year Baal rules, the wet season. 6 months of the year Moth rules together with Yam, drought, dry season. So it's an everlasting mythological battle that goes on, a bit like modern evolutionary theory, natural selection. The battle within creation of order, chaos. Now, this is turned around here in this psalm, said right at the beginning, and uses this imagery of battle. God defeated the chaos monsters in order to order the world. Now, if any of you are interested in following this through, there's been a lot of really good scholarship on this, and I can't give you all of it, but if you want to do your major project on it, well, I can help you with the bibliography. This is an amazingly clear, lovely little book, Ancient Myths and Biblical Faith by McCurley, a Lutheran American Old Testament scholar. And it goes both Old Testament, New Testament. I'll just leave it here, you can have a look at it. And I'll remind you also of the symbolism of the biblical world, Oth Mikhail. A lot of this, which comes, he deals with the Psalms, but the first, the first two big sections deal with conceptions of the cosmos and destructive forces. Okay? If you're interested in following it through, the first part, that's up to page 100 or so, is a good summary of much of this, but he's having a look at iconography in the ancient world, and much of what I've said, is just culling stuff that comes from here and books like this.
Are they recent texts?
What?
Are they recent?
This is reprinted and reprinted. This is a classical thing. It's first published 1978, but it keeps on being reprinted. Fiendishly expensive. This is one of my favourite books. If I had a library and I reduced it to 10, this would be one of the ones that I would retrieve as a scholar. As you see, it's battered. It's one of my treasures. This one, I'm not sure. I haven't checked whether it's in print, but you can very often get this kind of stuff. It's not in print. eBay. Right now. He orders chaotic powers, and chaotic is a little bit clumsy because I'm trying to put in modern terms something which is different. Chaotic in inverted commas. We have these chaotic things here, okay, up to here. Okay. Now, if God created a good world, remember at the end God saw everything that he'd made, it was very good, it was orderly. The basic question that arises, well, if God created a good world where chaos is ordered, how come there is chaos? How come there are the bushfires, floods, tsunamis, death, sickness, etc.? Now the answer that's given is, in the Old Testament from beginning to end, is that that's the result of human sin, the fall. It doesn't go back to, it's not the fall of Satan, although Satan plays a role in it, but puts human beings right in the hot seat. It's the result of human sin. Now that's an audacious claim, which is rejected by almost all your contemporaries. But it's very profound. And I think that they're being open to it again and now with the whole ecological crisis and the dawning on people that if there is global warming, ecological crisis, who's responsible? I know that's the easy way out. We are. That's yeah. So yeah. Yep. Then. Yep. Now, thirdly, what's interesting is that God didn't create a static order, a fixed order where everything was set in cement. But what you have here is a dynamic order with polarities. Now, notice these important polarities. The theory of polarity, it's a metaphor taken from electromagnetism, positive, negative forces. What are some of the basic polarities within these dynamic order? And they complement each other. There's the polarity of darkness and light. There's the polarity of night and day. There's a polarity of the abyss, the black hole, and then the sky, the firmament, the roof, the shelter. And I don't know how you could put that in modern scientific terms. So there's the black hole, and then there's the white universe. There's the polarity of the sun, day, light, and moon and stars, constellations, night. They work together. You have the polarity of fish and birds. Fish, sea, birds, air, and somehow related. There's the polarity then of humans and animals. But lastly, there's the most important polarity of all, which is the male-female polarity, which makes human life. It's not the only polarity, but it sits on top of all these other polarities. So, and by polarity then, you have a dynamic order, something that's not static.
That's where some of those analogies almost break down or are limited.
They all break down at that.
Yeah, exactly. But a potter shapes the pot, and
yes.
That's it. And like a painter does a painting, and that's it. But
yes.
it's not like that with creation. This continual word is quite.
Yes.
But farming maybe comes a bit closer, maybe in that sense that you set it, but then you also are continually creating as well. As
yes. Well, see, you get other. This is not exhaustive. This is illustrative. You get polarity of heavens, invisible world, and visible world, earth. You get the polarity of God versus creature. Now, all these dynamic polarities in this order. Okay, so you have an ordered world, a cosmic order, where everything has a purpose. Chaos is ordered, domesticated, and you have polarities within it. Now, within this, then you have an ordered space with assigned habitats. So you get the heavens, they are God's domain. The earth is human domain. Now, earth not used in the sense of the whole universe, visible universe, but earth here in the sense of planet Earth. So that's human domain. And particularly within the earth, it's the land, which is human domain. The earth is human domain with the sky for the birds, the sea for fish, land for plants, and animals and people. You see, you have ordered space and you have habitats. Each creature has its niche within the order of creation. Now that, by the way, and this is just an aside and there's no direct connection, is one of the very important insights of modern ecology, the whole notion of ecological niche. By the way, ecological, do you know what the picture that lies behind that? Ecological, ekos comes from oikos, which has to do with house. So it's the picture that lies behind it is that the world is a house. And everything is ordered for living. It's a house in which creatures live. And there's particular rooms that are given to particular living creatures. You have God's creation of ordered time. Just as space isn't eternal, it's a creature, so time isn't eternal. God creates time. And notice that there are 3 basic cycles that are touched on here. There's the daily cycle, evening, morning, day, night. That's the daily cycle of time. And then imposed on that you have the 7-day cycle, which doesn't fit into anything within the cosmic order. So there's the daily cycle that God creates, and then there's the monthly cycle. How's the monthly cycle determined? The phases of the moon, so the rotation of the moon over against the earth, and then you get the annual cycle of the rotation of the earth around the sun. And there's a hint here of even larger pictures, because when it mentions that God created the sun and the moon, the sun, year, moon, month. Sun also has to do with day, so sun, day, year, moon, month, but then there's also the stars, referring to the constellations, which you have then the larger rotations of stars relatively to the earth, which were the foundation for the zodiac and the house of the zodiac, if any of you know anything about astrology. So it's the larger cycles here that are hinted at. With times and seasons, that's what's touched on there. Fourthly, here there's an ecological order with many different classes and niches for each class of creature. God created the various basic species. Now, species probably is the wrong word in modern terms, because it has to do with, broadly speaking, in modern botany, it's the phyla, the big. It's even larger than genus. It's the big classifications of creatures. So you get the various classification of creatures. He creates classifications or various orders of vegetation. You have orders of fish life in the sea that teem in the sea. You have orders of birds for the sky, that's their habitat. And then you have species, orders, genuses of animals on the land. And then lastly, on top of all that, you get human beings created for the land too. So you get species and ecological niches for each of these big species. Now, what you get is big picture classification. And don't try and impose, modern scientific classification systems on this. It presupposes various classifications, but the terms here are pre-modern. Fifthly, within this order is a harmonious order. It's dynamic with polarities, but there is a harmony in it. And there's a set function for each part of God's creation. So it's not just a random order, but it has each creature has its own niche, its own support system, but it also has its function within the whole order. So light is created to separate day and night. The firmament is to separate the earth and the sky from each other to create space for human beings and plants and animals, to create a house, a habitat to live in. The earth is created to sustain and produce vegetation. The constellations are for days and seasons and years. Now they have a purpose, not just in themselves, but for the ordering of creation. The fish are to teem in the sea. The birds fly in the sky. The animals live on land. And human beings, and we'll come back to this, are created in the image of God to do two things: to rule over the animals and to subdue the earth. Very important terms. Sixthly, what we have here is, to use a modern term, an ecological order. Now, by an ecological order, I mean an order in which everything is interdependent. It's not just a lot of random things put together with no connection with each other, but everything depends on everything else. You know, some of the modern thinking about ecology, if you affect part of the ecological order, it goes all the way through the whole order. Right? This is the kind of thinking here. And the ecological order is one of dependence, and modern people have no difficulty about that, but the problem lies in this notion of rule. Order of dependence, yep, that makes good sense in modern scientific theory, but notion of rule goes beyond science.
There is a bit of a clash there with independency and rule,
because
they, in some ways, represent different things.
They represent different things, and particularly for our modern understanding. Now, all the lower, the higher orders, if I can put it that way, depend on the lower orders for their survival, their livelihood. And that's not just within the natural order, but within the physical realm too. You get the higher orders in the physical creation. In physics, depends on the lower orders. The higher orders rule over the lower orders. Now, I put rule, if you like, in inverted commas, because it's the word that's used here is different to what we normally understand by rule. Lastly, and most amazingly, God empowers the higher orders, which are birds and fish, animals and human beings, with his blessing. God empowers these higher orders with his life-giving blessing for reproduction and for living. What God does is delegate some of his own power, which is life power, not just to human beings, but also to animals, for them to use as custodians of his creation, as those who work with him in caring for creation. Excuse me. Number 7, and this is radical in the ancient world and increasingly in our modern world, where we're going to, once again, going to a metaphysical kind of a dualism. Spiritual is good, physical is bad. You know that kind of dualism? Now, right at the beginning, the Bible makes it quite clear that everything that God created, everything physical, is good. And the whole created order is very good. So matter is not antithetical to God. It's not antithetical to God's spirit. In fact, God uses matter to do his work. His spirit works through material things. Now that's very important when you come to incarnation and the sacraments. It's not that your spirit's good, your body's bad. The material world is good. God uses the physical world to interact with physical people in his physical world. Lastly, to use a philosophical term, the order is teleological. It has a goal. It has a purpose, a telos, an aim to it. What the accounts of creation show is God's purpose for life on earth. God's good purpose for life on earth. Most importantly, he created human beings to do two things: to work with him and rest with him. Now, in pagan mythology, the gods were loafers. They rested, and they created human beings to do their work for them. The Old Testament says that God is both one who works and rests, and therefore human beings work with God and they rest with God. And that's the basic pattern for human life on earth: working, resting. And of those two, the resting is more important than the working, because that's the goal. Strangely, as I've noted already, God blesses and sanctifies the Sabbath day. He blesses it so that it becomes a means of blessing for those who rest with him in it, and he sanctifies it as a means by which he sanctifies people and his creation. Now, almost the whole of the rest of the Bible fills in that spot from here onwards. The seventh day, the Sabbath later on, which is the Sabbath day, the day of rest, is a foretaste of eternity in time, which leads me to another very ancient notion, is that the 6 days represent this age, and the seventh day represents the age to come. The 6 days of creation are this age, the seventh day is the age to come. The age to come is the age of the eternal Sabbath. And every seventh day is then a window of time into eternity, or a foretaste of eternity in time. Now, you won't understand Jewish theology, practice of Sabbath, the importance of the Sabbath for Jewish people unless you see this lying at the very heart of their theology and practice. Most radically, what you have here is a complete redefinition of what worship is. In all pagan forms of religion, worship is work. You work for your gods. So ritual is work for the gods. Right at the very beginning, God created human beings not to work for him, but to rest with him. They are to stop working so that he can do his work on them, which is to bless them and to keep them holy. So resting as worship. Lastly, and I'll come to this too, and you can see this in Genesis 2, that God created Eden, the garden, as the archetypal sanctuary, the first temple, the first place of worship, if you like, a colony of heaven here on earth. Now, yes, Nathan?
I'm just going to make a comment. In our line of work, so to speak, as future pastors, you can see the difficulty then when we work to make worship happen on a Sunday.
Yes.
We never have the ability to appreciate it and to rest because God's name.
Yes. And
which is a shame for us personally.
yes.
That's our work then.
Yes. Yes. But you need to understand the way the New Testament then reconfigures the Sabbath. And so the important thing is not so much the day of rest, but a time of rest in order to hear God's word, because through God's word, God blesses us and makes us holy. And so the important thing isn't that particular day, but what is done on that day, what kind of rest. And it's not any kind of rest, because it has to do with resting from our works, our attempt to make something of ourselves, to justify ourselves, to create the world, to recreate the world, resting from our work so that God can do his work on us, which is to bless us and to make and keep us holy. Have a look at Luther's marvellous explanation of the Sabbath, the third commandment in his large catechism on this. But yes, in practical terms, it does mean, God established this pattern of 6 days work, 1 day rest at least, for the benefit of human beings. Quite apart from any spiritual benefit, it's part of the way God created us. And if we keep on working all the time, we are not fulfilling God's purpose for us in creation. We need rest. And if you can't have it on a Sunday, you have it on Saturday or Monday.
I think what Nathan was getting at was more the fact that our work is worship.
Yes.
Whereas, so that's
right.
Idea. And,
yes.
Whereas for everyone else, worship shouldn't be work.
It should be resting. Yep.
And that's right. And that's,
yes.
and that's I think the struggle Nathan was talking about.
Yes.
Is we do all this work
yes.
to worship. Yeah.
Yep. And that's going to be a real problem for all of you. But there's one very important way of dealing with that, and that is to prepare thoroughly. Which means that if you prepare thoroughly, then in fact you can, by working, also be listening and receiving and resting. Now some of you may have already got an inkling of that with your preaching, but it's not impossible, but it does mean that you're prepared yourself both physically and spiritually, so that you're carried along by what you do. But no, that's a real problem, and you've got to get the balance elsewhere. And so, Chris and Nathan, your resting, your devotional life is even more important for you as resting than for your members, so that you have time in which you take in, you receive, because you don't have that receiving in worship, you have to give out. But any further questions on this aspect of this teaching on God's creation of an ordered world? Any questions or any problems? Right, the next topic, which I'd like to start on today, is God's creation of humanity. Now, as you all know, one of the key terms in Genesis 1 through to 5 is the term Adam. Adam. It's closely related to, even though it's not directly connected to etymologically, from Adamah, which is the ground, the soil. Adam can mean one of the following things. Most obviously, it is humanity. So it's a collective term. Humanity, humankind, mankind. So it's generic. Okay? God created Adam means God created humanity. Secondly, it can be a particular human being. You are an Adam. Liz, you are an Adam, even though you are a woman. You are a human being. Thirdly, it can be used for a male person. A male person. So God created Adam from the dust of the earth is a male person. What's the number? That's 4. The number 5, it can also mean be the name for the first male person. Adam, a proper name. Okay, so we need to see that range of terminology in Genesis, which doesn't always come through in translation. And when you translate, you narrow things down a bit. Okay? But this is what hovering. The first thing that Genesis says about human beings is it asserts that we human beings belong to the family of animals. Take notice that God created animals and human beings on the same day. We have a kinship with the animals, but we also have a kinship with the material and biological world. We human beings, okay, take what I am here. Number 1, I am a physical creature. Everything here can be reduced to atoms and molecules. The Old Testament way of saying that, the dust of the earth, the ground, the soil. I am a physical machine, okay, from one point of view. Secondly, I am an animal. I'm a biological machine, I can put it that way. Scientifically speaking, most of my DNA I share with plants and animals. Do you realise that we don't not only share our DNA with animals, but also with plants, a certain significant amount of it. So we are natural creatures. Now, how is this expressed then in Genesis? God created Adam from the earth, and human beings returned to the earth. Very profound. Okay, so we are physical creatures. Secondly, we are animate creatures. We are not just Adam, but we have nephesh. Now, nephesh is a word that has a wide range of meaning. It has, first, it's most literally has to do with breath and life, power, breath, and then it can mean person or soul. You know, how many neshafoth are in this room? How many persons are in this room? When you die, your nephesh leaves you. What does it mean? Your life power leaves you, your soul leaves the body. I know? Nephesh. Now, what other creatures have nephesh and are nephesh? Animals, birds, and fish.
They all have souls.
But here's the problem. There's difference in soul, which means being a living creature, and having a identity, a soul in the sense of self. Soul here not in the sense of self, but in the sense of being a animate creature. Now, and so we are nephesh together with all other breathing creatures. We have life breath. So there's a difference between plants and animals and human beings. Animals, human beings breathe with lungs, whereas plants absorb oxygen. So we are animate creatures like birds, fish, and animals. They are blessed for procreation like us. We have the power to procreate. Procreation doesn't happen automatically. Most importantly, of all living creatures, the land animals are closest to us. The land animals, and within the land animals, the Old Testament classifies the wild beasts as distinct from those that you can domesticate, the domesticatable animals, which become part of the human family. So sheep and goats and cattle, if you like, belong to the family. They're closer to human beings than lions and giraffes and the other animals that you don't domesticate. But they are our brothers and sisters. There's no denial of our kinship with them. And in fact, people who live close to the land, who basically live with animals in subsistence economy, have a far more acute awareness than you and I do of the interdependence of human beings and animals with each other. I still have a little bit of an inkling of this because when I grew up on a farm, and it's not just the dogs were part of the family, but all the farm, we had a mixed farm and we had a whole range of animals, including we didn't have tractors when I was young, but we had horses and cows, and they were a very important part of the family, the household, in a way that we urban people cannot possibly appreciate anymore. And that's within the space of one generation. We've shifted right away from this. So human beings are co-creatures. We are made of the same material as all other creatures. We are share a kinship with the animals. I think I'll stop there, and we'll pick up now the uniqueness of humanity. What I want you to do is to have a look at the key verses which have to do with the creation of humanity in God's image. If those of you who have Hebrew, Genesis chapter 1, 26 through to 28. There's stuff there that I need to go back to the Hebrew to point out to you, and so it'll help you if you've gone through. It's not difficult Hebrew, just read that. So Genesis 1, 26 to 28, but reread that whole last part of Genesis 1.